Good evening. The idea that a sitting U.S. president might attempt to acquire Greenland sounds like the opening line of a political thriller, but in this case, it is real-world geopolitics intersecting with economic ambition and strategic calculation. The question we need to ask is not whether this idea is plausible in fiction, but how far it could go in practice and what it reveals about the exercise of power, influence, and national priorities. Experts examining this situation are quick to point out that Greenland is not just a frozen landmass. It is a strategic asset, rich in natural resources, geographically pivotal, and politically sensitive. Any attempt to acquire or control it is about more than territory. It is about projecting influence, securing economic advantages, and reshaping the global balance. Here is the first hook. The conversation about Greenland is as much about perception as it is about reality. The announcement of interest, the public rhetoric, and the headlines themselves function as tools of signaling to allies, to adversaries, and to domestic audiences. By raising the possibility of acquisition, Trump inserted the United States into a debate that blends sovereignty, economics, and international law. Experts warn that even entertaining such a move can have consequences, influencing diplomatic relationships, market expectations, and the behavior of other powers with interests in the Arctic region. From a strategic perspective, Greenland is unique. Its location offers a foothold in the Arctic, where melting ice is opening shipping lanes, access to rare earth minerals is expanding, and military positioning carries long-term significance. Analysts point out that interest in Greenland is not purely American. China, Russia, and European powers are all calculating how to secure influence in the region. That global competition underscores why any unilateral attempt to purchase or control Greenland would not be a simple real estate transaction. It is an entanglement of legal frameworks, diplomatic obligations, and geopolitical risk. Economically, experts emphasize that the notion of acquisition masks the reality of cost, governance, and integration. Greenland's resources are substantial, but exploitation requires infrastructure, environmental considerations, and long-term investment. The rhetoric of control obscures the practical challenges: local autonomy, international law, and the unwillingness of Greenland's population and Danish government to surrender sovereignty. Here lies the second hook. The limits of power are often revealed not by ambition, but by the friction between ambition and feasibility. Politically, this episode illuminates the domestic calculus of leadership. Bold proposals, however impractical, serve to frame a narrative of decisiveness and ambition. They energize supporters, dominate headlines, and create a spectacle of assertiveness. Experts caution that these signals are frequently intended more for domestic consumption than for international execution. The discussion of Greenland is therefore both a mirror and a lens. It reflects internal political priorities and magnifies strategic questions about America's role in the Arctic and global competition. So, how far will Trump go to take Greenland? Experts agree the answer is constrained by law, diplomacy, and practical feasibility. Yet the conversation itself matters, because it illuminates how leaders use power, perception, and ambition to shape both domestic opinion and international relations. Greenland is more than ice and minerals. It is a symbol of strategic opportunity and a test case for the limits of executive imagination. As we watch this story unfold, the question is not simply whether acquisition is possible, but what the pursuit of such ambition tells us about priorities, influence, and the exercise of power in an interconnected world. Greenland is a strategic asset, not just territory. Greenland's significance extends far beyond its physical size or its icy terrain, positioning it as a strategic asset with both regional and global implications. Its geographic location in the Arctic makes it a critical point of access to emerging shipping lanes, particularly as climate change accelerates the melting of ice and opens maritime routes previously inaccessible. Control or influence over Greenland offers potential leverage in monitoring and projecting military presence across the Arctic and North Atlantic regions, where proximity to North America, Europe, and the polar route provides a unique vantage point for defense, surveillance, and early warning systems. This geographic advantage is not merely theoretical, Military planners recognize that even limited control of territory in this region can provide substantial strategic depth, enabling rapid deployment and logistical support in an area that is otherwise remote and difficult to operate within. Beyond military considerations, Greenland is rich in natural resources that have drawn the attention of multiple global powers. The island contains deposits of rare earth elements, critical minerals, and hydrocarbons that are increasingly important in advanced technologies and energy sectors. Access to these resources provides not only economic opportunity, but also geopolitical influence, as nations compete to secure supply chains for materials essential to electronics, defense systems, and renewable energy infrastructure. This dual strategic and economic importance elevates Greenland from a peripheral territory to a focal point in discussions about Arctic competition and global influence. The strategic relevance of Greenland is further amplified by the presence of existing infrastructure and international agreements that govern activity in the Arctic. Facilities such as air bases and monitoring stations already extend capabilities in surveillance, communications, and defense coordination, offering a foundation upon which expanded influence could be built. Moreover, Greenland's status within the Kingdom of Denmark introduces a layer of political complexity, requiring engagement with allies, negotiation over sovereignty, and adherence to established international frameworks. These factors mean that any attempt to assert control or significantly influence the region cannot be considered in isolation. It must be evaluated within the broader context of Arctic governance, regional security arrangements, and international law. The combination of geographic positioning, natural resources, and existing infrastructure makes Greenland a unique strategic asset. Its importance is recognized by multiple global actors, each evaluating the potential benefits of presence and influence in a region increasingly central to military, economic, and geopolitical calculations. The island is therefore not merely a territory to be considered in abstract terms, but a key node in the broader architecture of Arctic and global strategy, where control or influence can translate into both tangible capabilities and leverage in international affairs. The discussion surrounding Greenland highlights the central role of rhetoric and signaling in modern geopolitics, illustrating how public statements and political narratives can influence perceptions as profoundly as tangible actions. When high-profile leaders announce interest in acquiring or exerting influence over a territory like Greenland, the primary effect is often the generation of signals directed toward multiple audiences, including allies, potential adversaries, and domestic constituencies. These statements function as strategic instruments, shaping expectations, testing reactions, and establishing narratives that extend beyond the immediate feasibility of the proposal itself. In this context, rhetoric becomes a tool of influence, allowing leaders to project ambition and assertiveness without the necessity of immediate operational implementation. Signaling operates on several levels simultaneously. Internationally, the discussion of Greenland signals U.S. engagement in the Arctic, reinforcing perceptions that the United States is attentive to emerging strategic challenges and competitive developments in the region. By publicly entertaining the idea of acquisition, policymakers convey to allies and rival powers alike that Greenland is a priority in U.S. strategic calculations. This signaling can influence diplomatic negotiations, prompt recalibration of foreign policy priorities by other actors, and shape broader regional dynamics, even in the absence of concrete plans or actionable steps. Domestically, the rhetoric surrounding Greenland serves political functions by capturing public attention, framing leadership as decisive, and reinforcing narratives of national strength. Bold proposals, even if largely symbolic, generate media coverage, shape discourse, and provide a visible demonstration of assertiveness. By presenting ambitious objectives, leaders can cultivate perceptions of initiative and strategic vision, energizing supporters and enhancing political positioning. These domestic signaling effects often carry more immediate weight than the feasibility of the underlying proposal, underscoring the performative dimension of geopolitical rhetoric. Furthermore, signaling through rhetoric creates indirect effects on markets, investors, and civil institutions. Public statements about territorial ambition can prompt speculation about economic opportunities, resource exploitation, and future policy directions, influencing decisions long before any operational measures are enacted. The anticipation generated by rhetoric can therefore mobilize capital, reshape strategic planning, and indirectly affect international behavior. In essence, the discussion of Greenland demonstrates that in contemporary geopolitics, rhetoric functions as a form of soft power with tangible consequences. By shaping perceptions, expectations, and strategic calculations across multiple levels, public statements and political narratives operate as a mechanism of influence that is distinct from, but often complementary to, the execution of policy. Through signaling, the act of discussion itself becomes a strategic instrument, producing effects that extend far beyond the literal plausibility of territorial acquisition. Any consideration of acquiring or influencing Greenland must confront substantial legal, diplomatic, and practical barriers, reflecting the complex interplay between sovereignty, international law, and political feasibility. Greenland is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, meaning that while it exercises significant self-governance, ultimate authority on matters of foreign policy and defense remains with Denmark. This duality introduces a legal and political framework that makes unilateral acquisition by another state highly improbable. International law upholds the principles of territorial integrity and non-interference, rendering any attempt at forced acquisition or coercive pressure inconsistent with widely recognized norms. These frameworks are reinforced by treaties, Arctic governance mechanisms, and multilateral agreements, all of which limit the scope for unilateral territorial claims. Diplomatically, Greenland occupies a sensitive position. It is not only part of the Kingdom of Denmark, but also strategically situated within the Arctic, a region of growing importance to multiple global powers. Any move to assert control over Greenland would inevitably provoke reactions from allies and competitors alike, including the European Union, NATO partners, and regional Arctic actors. Diplomacy in this context is both formal and informal, encompassing negotiations, public statements, and the management of perceptions. Attempts to acquire or exert influence over Greenland without careful diplomatic coordination would risk destabilizing alliances and undermining broader strategic relationships, illustrating that political feasibility is constrained as much by international trust as by legal statutes. Practical challenges further complicate any potential acquisition. Greenland's infrastructure is limited, and its environment presents logistical obstacles to governance, resource exploitation, and military presence. Development projects in the region require substantial investment in transportation, energy, housing, and environmental management, all of which demand long-term commitment and coordination with local authorities. Moreover, Greenland's population maintains strong cultural and political identities, and both public opinion and self-determination principles would resist external attempts to undermine autonomy. Ignoring these practical considerations risks creating conflict, resistance, and prolonged instability rather than achieving control or influence. In addition, the combination of legal, diplomatic, and logistical constraints interacts synergistically, reinforcing the improbability of any unilateral initiative. Legal limitations constrain the options available, diplomatic sensitivities amplify political risks, and practical challenges magnify the costs and complexity of action. This triad of constraints demonstrates that even proposals framed as ambitious or bold are bounded by structural realities that make execution extraordinarily difficult. Any analysis of territorial ambition must therefore consider these intersecting barriers, emphasizing that sovereignty, governance, and feasibility are intertwined dimensions that collectively define the limits of political action in contexts like Greenland. The economic and logistical realities of Greenland present significant challenges to any attempt at acquisition or control, emphasizing the disparity between political ambition and operational feasibility. Greenland's resource wealth, including rare earth minerals, hydrocarbons, and strategic metals, is often cited as a rationale for interest, but extracting and managing these assets requires substantial infrastructure, technological capability, and sustained investment. The terrain itself is largely remote and sparsely populated, with limited transportation networks, energy infrastructure, and industrial capacity. Any effort to exploit the island's resources at scale would necessitate the construction of ports, airstrips, power systems, and housing, as well as the development of specialized logistics to operate in extreme Arctic conditions. These requirements impose both financial and temporal burdens, that cannot be addressed by political declaration alone, highlighting the complexity of translating ambition into tangible outcomes. In addition to physical infrastructure, environmental and regulatory constraints further complicate operations. Greenland's ecosystem is fragile, and activities such as mining, oil extraction, or large-scale construction require careful management to prevent ecological disruption. International norms, environmental treaties, and local regulations mandate adherence to stringent standards, increasing both the cost and duration of projects. Compliance with these frameworks is not optional, and attempts to bypass or accelerate processes risk international condemnation, legal challenges, and reputational damage, creating additional barriers to practical implementation. Local governance and population perspectives are equally significant. Greenland maintains a high degree of political autonomy, with institutions that control domestic affairs, including natural resource management. Any external attempt to impose control over the island's resources or governance structures would confront both institutional resistance and popular opposition. Engagement with local stakeholders is not only politically necessary but also operationally essential, as local expertise, labor, and knowledge of the environment are critical for successful implementation. Ignoring or underestimating these human factors introduces substantial risk to any strategic initiative. Furthermore, logistical challenges extend to supply chains, communications, and sustained presence. The extreme climate, seasonal variations, and geographic isolation require robust planning and redundancy to maintain operations. Transporting personnel, equipment, and materials into and across Greenland involves specialized vessels, aircraft, and support systems, all of which significantly increase operational complexity and cost. These logistical considerations underscore that acquiring or influencing Greenland is not a matter of simple negotiation or purchase. It is an intricate endeavor that demands long-term planning, coordination, and investment across multiple dimensions. Collectively, these economic and logistical realities illustrate the practical limits of political ambition. Resource wealth and strategic location may generate interest, but turning aspiration into actionable control requires addressing structural, environmental, and operational constraints that are both substantial and enduring. Political declarations alone cannot overcome these material challenges, highlighting the gap between perception and feasibility in the pursuit of Greenland. Domestic political objectives often play a central role in shaping bold geopolitical proposals, such as the idea of acquiring Greenland, revealing that public ambition frequently serves internal agendas more than actionable strategy. High-profile initiatives, even when impractical, function as instruments of narrative construction, allowing leaders to project decisiveness, assertiveness, and vision to a domestic audience. These proposals dominate media coverage, capture public attention, and create the impression of strategic initiative, signaling leadership qualities valued by constituents and supporters. In this sense, political communication and perception management become primary objectives, with the substantive feasibility of the proposal often secondary to its rhetorical and symbolic utility. Such proposals also serve to energize political bases by framing leadership in terms of boldness and national ambition. Presenting a high-stakes goal, particularly one involving territory or strategic resources, cultivates an image of decisiveness that contrasts with perceived inaction or compromise by previous administrations. The discussion of Greenland, for example, allows leaders to claim engagement in complex international affairs, positioning themselves as assertive actors in a global landscape, regardless of the legal, diplomatic, or logistical constraints involved. This performative dimension reinforces domestic support, mobilizes public interest, and enhances political legitimacy, demonstrating the strategic value of rhetoric as a tool of internal politics. Moreover, framing ambitious territorial or strategic proposals can shift the domestic narrative around broader policy priorities. By emphasizing expansion, resource acquisition, or global influence, leaders redirect attention from domestic shortcomings or controversial policies, creating a discourse that highlights opportunity, strength, and initiative. This narrative reframing can be effective in consolidating political support, shaping media agendas, and influencing public perception, even when implementation is highly improbable. In this context, proposals like Greenland function as signaling devices within domestic political markets, conveying capability, ambition, and national assertiveness. Political objectives also shape the timing and presentation of such initiatives. Leaders may introduce proposals during election cycles, budget negotiations, or moments of heightened media attention to maximize visibility and impact. The strategic deployment of these ideas reflects careful calculation of public receptivity, demonstrating that domestic political gain often drives the articulation of ambitious foreign policy initiatives more than operational feasibility. Ultimately, the discussion of Greenland underscores that in contemporary politics, audacious proposals frequently operate as tools of domestic narrative and political positioning. They provide leaders with the opportunity to frame themselves as bold and proactive actors, energize constituencies, and dominate public discourse, revealing that the domestic political utility of ambition often outweighs considerations of practical implementation or international constraint.